is being recorded.
Go for it.
This virtual meeting is about sessions. We're going to talk about some additional wording or some modified wording around the P-sets idea, mostly in response to issues raised by Martin and also by others. So I guess what's that? Oh, that's a typo in some other chapters. I'll ignore that bit. So I'm basically going to go through this pull request. This is pull request 37. The changes aren't, I hope, that controversial, and hopefully they're just implementing the stuff that we were sort of told to do in the last face-to-face meeting and various other conversations. So I'll just go through in order, the order in the chat, and trying to reorder stuff into a logical order. So the first thing that's been changed here is a new advice to implementers. So this, we'd already put in an advice to users here. Let's just see if I can get to the beginning of that. There was already an advice to users saying requesting thread single is a bad idea. Added an advice to implementers saying, owing to the restrictions of the MPI thread single thread support level, implementers are discouraged from making this the default thread support level for sessions. Okay, so this is the counterpoint to the users shouldn't ask for it and implementers shouldn't provide it as the default. They you know, those are effectively the same requirement, just on two different groups of people. So do just jump in if you've got any questions or concerns about any of these things. Just interrupt me. So this change is just a which to a that, which is grammar. We can ignore that. So in the definition for the MPI session get num psets function, this is the thing that gets the number of psets. Is that right? Yes, that's right. Okay, so say this function is used to query the runtime for the number of available process sets in which the calling MPI process is a member. It still says that. But then instead of saying the number of available process sets returned by this function may increase with subsequent calls to the function, but will not decrease, we're a bit more specific about what we actually meant there, in line with what's said about CVARs and PVARs in the tools chapter. So there's all of this text instead of that one sentence. So an MPI implementation is allowed to increase the number of available process sets during the execution of an MPI application when new process sets become available. However, MPI implementations are not allowed to change the index of a particular process set name, or to change the name of the process set at a particular index, or to delete a process set name once it's been added. When a process set becomes invalid, for example, when some processes become unreachable due to failures in the communication system, subsequent usage of the process set name should return an appropriate error code. And then, for example, creating an MPI group from such a process set might succeed because it is a local operation, but creating an MPI COM from that group and attempting collective should return an appropriate error code. Okay, so that's what we've done to the session get num psets function. So unless there are obvious questions about that straight away, I'll move on to the rest. There are some other changes that sort of influence this and vice versa. So if you have suggestions, I'll go through the rest of the text and see if those are still issues for you later. I'll pause in case anybody's got any questions about that. Okay, good. That's just a LaTeX comment. I'm ignoring that. So this change here is we are completely removing the MPI session get set len function and the text that described it. Okay, so this is in line with the changes that Ryan presented at the face-to-face meeting to do with info and getting the strings, the string values and the lengths of strings in the info value stuff. So there's a concern that so somebody was trying to ask a question, I guess, and got feedback. Okay, I shall move on. So the change here is that some concern over whether strings were always null terminated in C returned by the MPI library. The answer should always be yes. And this is another situation. We're introducing a situation where strings are being returned from MPI. And so we should probably do a good thing rather than a bad thing here. And so one of the options that seemed to be the most likely option to get accepted for the info stuff was to have a single function where you have an in-out parameter for the length, but you're actually asking for the string and have an in-out parameter for its length. So you tell MPI how much storage space there is for the buffer on the way in, and it will tell you how much storage space was required by the string on the way out. So there was that usage for the info stuff. That sounds like a really good idea. Let's do that. So that's what we're doing here. So that means that the getting the length function actually doesn't exist, shouldn't exist, right? So we've removed this function, but what we've also done is then changed the parameter, the intent of the parameter for the next function, which is MPI session get pset. This is trying to get the pset name, rather than having the pset length as being just an in parameter, we've changed it to be in out, so that we can get this requested semantic out of this function. So we've changed all the bindings in out for all the binding locations, and then modified the text to reflect that. So this function returns the name of the nth process set in the supplied pset name buffer. So instead of saying pset length is the number of characters available in pset name, to do with truncated strings, pset len is the size of the buffer needed to store the nth process set name. If the pset len passed into the function is less than the actual buffer size needed for the process set name, then the string value returned in pset name is truncated. If pset len is set to 0, pset name is not changed. On the value of pset len will be set to the required buffer size to hold the process set name. In C, pset len includes the required space for the null terminator. In C, this function returns a null terminated string in all cases where the pset len input value is 0. Okay, so that's basically setting it up the same way as what we preferred anyway, Howard and I preferred as the option presented for doing the info get value stuff. So hopefully we've done that right in that's describing the correct semantic. We haven't left any holes that people can just approve that. But does anybody have any questions on that? Issues, concerns, stuff? Okay, that was easy. So then, after a successful call to MPI session get nth pset, subsequent calls to return that query information, the same process set name and same session handle must return the same information. An MPI implementation is not allowed to alter any of the returned process set names. So that's effectively of the earlier thing in the num psets function, saying basically once MPI has told you that this process set exists, it's not allowed to do anything to it. It's not allowed to modify it.
Noting there that since you can't change a process set name afterwards, it somewhat negates some of the reasoning for why you want one function to both set and get name lengths, but I agree that for consistency, it's okay to keep it that way. But since it can never change, you don't really have this issue of I called this and then something changed out from under me and then I don't get what I expect back and that sort of thing. So
Yeah, I agree with that. I may not know ahead of time what the length is, and so declare a buffer that's say 100 characters long, and keep calling this function until it tells me that I needed a buffer that was longer than that, and extend the buffer. So it's still useful to have this feedback. Yeah, it worked this time. Yeah, it worked that time. Yeah, it worked that time. Oh no, this one. That's still a useful thing to me. But even if they're not going to change dynamically, next time I ask, I know how big it's going to be because it's the same size as it was last time.
I think it's fine. I just think your argument for changing the function here is sort of consistency with the rest of it rather than the exact same issue that's motivating that design elsewhere in the spec. That's all.
Absolutely, I agree with that. Yeah, I think consistency is a good argument, and it should carry the day. It's a sufficiently good argument. It should carry the day here. But okay, good. So this moving that function that we've removed from some list or other. Then we've updated the examples. How it's updated the examples here. Instead of calling MPI session get nth pset len function, it just sets len to 0 and then calls the get nth pset function. It can pass in null for pset name because it's not going to get changed because this is 0. So this is effectively the same as that function call. It will get me the length that is required for that particular pset. I can then allocate the buffer, and this is now correct because it will be the right number of characters as in bytes for the buffer, because this is now saying it's the buffer length, not the string length. It's not the number of characters I need, it's the number of buffers I need to store the thing properly. And then just put the and here to make it an in-out parameter. Okay, so that's just correcting the example to match the other changes we've done. I think the same thing happens here. This different example, replace this one line with these two lines. Actually, that should have an ampersand. Sorry, let me just put an ampersand there. Good. Right. So unless anybody else is noticing problems with these things, actually, I suppose is pset name. I don't know what the definition of that is. I'll check that later. Okay, so then different type of change. There's a section that was called singleton MPI init in MPI 3, MPI 3.1, and that's a section that we've moved across to a different chapter, and we've modified some of the contents because we're doing sessions now as well. So this isn't just MPI init anymore. So here we've changed this to, instead of saying MPI init as being what's being singleton, it's singleton initialization instead. And we a few changes in this section to try and acknowledge the existence of sessions. So I'm not really sure whether the or not. So your comments would be useful in this regard. So basically this says a high quality implementation will allow any process, including those not started with a parallel application mechanism, to become an MPI process by doing stuff. So it used to say by calling MPI init, which was always actually wrong because it didn't say init thread. So we've expanded that to include the list of things that might initialize an MPI process to become an MPI process. So we know of init, an MPI session init, are the three things that get you to the point where you might be an MPI process. Okay, and then such a process can then do stuff. Okay. Nobody's shouting yet, good. So then there's an advice to implementers which used to say to start MPI processes belonging to the same MPI COM world requires some special coordination. So we've changed that around a bit to say special coordination is required. I'm the host now, thank you. special coordination is required to start MPI processes belonging to the same com world. That's the same bit as before. In the case of the world process model, or same MPI/world process set in the sessions model. Okay. So that's effectively the equivalent operation. Is, you know, if I started a bunch of processes, they need to be started in some special way in order to end up in the same com world. They also need to be started in some special way to end up in the same MPI world process set. Otherwise, singletons, or maybe some of them will be in an MPI world, some of them will be in a different MPI world because some of them were started together in whatever that means, and some of them will not. So the other sentences here explain some of what this special coordination is. The processes must be started at the same time, whatever that means. They must have a mechanism to establish communication, etc. Somebody must do something special to make this happen. Right. So it's basically saying that the same special things need to happen an MPI world process set as was necessary for MPI com world. Okay. And then instead of saying when an application enters MPI init clearly, be able to determine if these special steps were taken, we've just put considering the world process model when an application enters MPI init clearly, blah. So this was the simplest way of changing this. We could do, for this one sentence, it would be simple. When considering the sessions process model, when an application enters MPI session init, something, you know, MPI needs to be able to determine the same thing. Potentially it's during session init, maybe it's a bit later than that actually with sessions. So it's not necessarily a straight one-for-one replacement in terms of the sentence. But then also these other sentences beyond start to complicate things, you know, a lot more. If a process enters MPI in and determines that no special steps were taken, i.e. it is not given the information to form an MPI com world with other processes, it proceeds and forms a singleton MPI program. That is one in which MPI com world has size 1. So at what point would MPI decide that it's a singleton in the sessions world, in the sessions model? Conceptually, I guess it could be as late as when you try to create the first communicator, or when you try and get process sets, right? Because you're asking for process sets at the point where you first ask. Processes haven't started yet. You don't know what the process sets are. You know that there must be an MPI world. Once you've asked for it, it must be information from it forevermore, because that's the way we've just defined the about process sets. So once you've got a world and you've asked and it says there are 3 processes in it, then there are 3 processes in your world forevermore, even if more processes start. So I think that this probably specifies enough, and we don't have to do another set of sentences like this for the sessions model. It's basically the same as the world model here. I think there is some debate about how late you could start those processes and still have this work. Session init is supposed to be local and therefore can't at least coordinate with other processes. It can't wait until other processes call session init to see if they're going to be MPI processes. But maybe some of this special coordination could be done, and session init could recognize whether that special coordination has happened or not. So I think there's some debate about exactly when MPI needs to become aware of this special. It could be a little bit later in the sessions model. I'm not sure I want to specify it, but I'm interested to see what other people think about this particular point. Okay, does that mean everybody's happy with the text as I've just read it out then? Is anybody still connected to the call?
Good to meet him.
So I guess I could also throw out, Martin, you're on the call. I name on the participants list. Does that address the concerns that you had with the PSET stuff earlier in what I've just said? I wonder if Martin's still connected.
Or is that Martin Ruffinact that's on the call?
There is a Martin, and that Martin has put in the chat that they're trying to talk, but the mic is not working. So I don't know which. It is Martin Schulz. Also, okay. So perhaps could write comment saying yes or no about whether it addresses concerns or not. We if you've got concerns, then I'm happy to listen to them. Okay, Martin said, go on, we'll try to get the mic working. I'm basically done in terms of the presentation of the stuff. Those are the changes that that we've made since the last face-to-face meeting. So if people are happy with that, I mean, there are some other changes, but they're sufficiently minor. They're basically ticket zero stuff. Those are the substantive change we need to get approval for and warn people about before the next face-to-face meeting. So basically, I think I'm done unless people have I've got other concerns either with this or other areas of the proposal. If there are other substantive changes that people want to see at this late stage, then now is the time to raise those issues. Or at least if you don't raise them now, then it will be too late.
So Dan, can you hear me now?
Hi, Martin.
Hi, sorry about this. I don't know what's up with my mic. Dialing into my phone now as a second connection.
Fantastic. Hi.
That's high-tech for you,
Yes.
right? So there's two things I wanted to mention. So one, and I think for most part, it addressed at least my concerns that I had. So, but also we went through an extra round beforehand anyway, right? I think the issue you had with the init is something that I really, you brought up something I really think we have to think about, but about the whole timing issue for the sessions part.
Mm-hmm.
But I personally would be happy just to leave this open for now and leave it to the implementers. They obviously have to find a way to make this work. Right. I think it's clearly defined what we want to see when we ask for the world set. And I think it's up to the runtime developers to figure out how they need to make the coordination work for that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the work that that Nathan did in the cluster paper this year, he's basically taken the existing Open MPI init code and broken it up into pieces, and then just figured out when each piece gets done. So all of the same work gets done, and therefore all of the same requirements are needed. And it's just a matter of timing when those bits of code run. And so it's actually, we're not adding a new requirement here. We're not modifying an old requirement. It's it's exactly the same code. It's just broken up into pieces.
Right, but basically, when you ask for the group of world, every process needs to know about the other process somehow, right?
It needs to know the information. It doesn't need to know. It doesn't need to go and connect the process. It needs to know that there is supposed to be 100 of us here. Right. It doesn't actually need to know that the other 99 have started yet. It just needs something needs to respond and say there's going to be 100 of you. Right. So how late do you actually need to connect to all 100? Well, you may never need to connect to all 100. Right. You may have a sparse connection. How am I going to verify that all 100 really exist? Well, I could do a barrier across it, see if it works. Right. It could be quite late before I actually realize that some of these processes don't really exist. or aren't responding or you know, are dead in some way. But I could still get a valid com world, right, or you know, MPI world set. I know that the size is 100. That's enough for now. Then I group from it. I need to know something about the identities of each of those things, but I don't necessarily. It's still local, right? It may never actually work when I do a communicator and do a collective communication. The latest point at which I can delay some of this setup and wiring up stuff is when do I do the first collective communication on this communicator, right? I only ever do point to point on it. I only ever need to wire up the connection that gets me to that, you know, side, whichever process that is. The other 98 might not have started yet, but you know, me and this other guy can communicate. That's fine, right? I won't actually realize the communicator is broken until, you know, necessarily. I might do, but
Sure. But I think by the time you create the group, there needs to be some information there, right?
yeah, but you can get that from your local, you know, PIMX server or something, or whatever, you know, system you're getting, right? The job scheduler thing, assuming there is this parallel application starter thing that's sort of vaguely mentioned in the standard. If there's Slurm or something like that, you might be able to get an idea of how many processes there are supposed to be, even if they're not yet, right? And that's enough to be able to create the MPI world set, because that set really only consists of how many things are there, right? When I create a group, then I'm going to need some more information about the identities. What do I expect? You know, when I create a page out of this thing, how am I going to, you know, what information do I need at the group stage? But I don't need to go and communicate with them. I don't need to verify they exist yet, even at that stage. I could delay, you know, I could delay a lot of this stuff. So I don't think I want to be, I certainly don't want to be precise and say you must do it then, because that's going to limit implementations. I'm not even sure that I want to be, you know, very specific about the semantics that are going on here. We've specified enough, I think, in that we sort of have a collective understanding of what the world should be. If we want to be more precise, then that's great, but I think we have to have a discussion about what wording to put in and what restrictions we're putting on things, with whichever wording we decide.
Right, and that's exactly what I meant before. I think we should be precise enough for a runtime developer or for an MPI developer to build this, and we'll have to see over time what restrictions are necessary, right? And we can add those later on. I think leaving it open and implementation defined right now is probably the safest way to be.
Yeah, I think the thing is that to comply with this, every process started by a Slurm where you said, you know, I want to create 100 processes, and it did, but every single one of them turned up with a world set of size 1, right? Because they all started as a singleton. That would match this, right? But nobody would use it. Nobody would be happy with that. They'd go back to their vendor of their MPI library and say, what's going on here, right? I created them with the same Slurm. I expected, you know, a different MPI world here. What's going on, right? And you know, I think best practice will form around. You start 100 processes together, they probably ought to be in the same world, you know, same world set. But technically, there's nothing that says they should do that. I suppose technically, there's nothing to say they should be in the same com world either.
Right. I mean, once you start versioning sets, then it's probably going to change the picture again, right?
I guess that would also have a act here, because the first version of MPI world might not have 100 things in it, but I don't, you know, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I said, but I think this specifying that now is probably a mistake.
Yeah. Yeah, I think also we did specify it for sessions. We would probably also then have to specify the equivalent for MPI com world. We never specified that. So we'd actually be going retrofitting it back to the last 25 years worth of MPI, you know, and saying this should have been true before. Indeed, you know, it's what you would expect to happen, but it's never actually been specified. And so now that we're specifying it for one, we have to specify it for the other. You know, it matches everybody's expectations, I would hope, but it's you know, over specifying relative to what we've already got.
I agree. Anybody else any comments on this topic? I have one other thing I want to bring up. It's a short one, but I don't want to distract if other people have comment to that particular issue. I guess that's not the case. The other thing I had, and perhaps I missed it, just you added the changes on the get set number. I forget the exact name, but where you ask for the number of sets, that those can't decrease, but they can only increase, and things can't change in between, right? And I think you guys, took this from the MPIT chapter, mostly, right?
Yeah, I think Howard started with that text and then modified it a fair amount, I think, because all the parameter names are different and things.
Sure.
We ended up with this, which I did read out, but so
that part is I'm completely on board with this. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's good. In the MPIT chapter, we just had a counterpoint to that as well in the actual query of the set name, where it says this, once you query it, whenever you call that function again, you can never return something different. And did you guys add that as well, or is that somewhere else?
So I'm not quite sure what you mean. Do you mean this sentence? After a successful call to whatever, subsequent calls to routine query information about the same process set name and session handler must return the same information. So basically, if I ask how big is this set, I get the same result.
The NP set. Yeah, that's I missed it.
To mobile device.
Sorry, my computer is going haywire today. Yes, that's the sentence I missed before, probably while I was playing with my microphone. Yeah, that's what I was missing. That's good. Okay, I'm happy. I'm fine with that.
Disconnected.
So I think that at least clarifies it for me. I think that covers the stuff that we were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is what we always intended, and we just weren't precise enough with the wording. So I think this is a good addition. I think this doesn't make any changes to the the prototype implementations and our intent. It's just additional wording saying what we meant in the first place. So that.
All right. The other thing we talked about is adding an info argument. Did you guys do that?
An info argument. I'm not sure what to.
So there was a discussion with Howard, and is Howard on a call?
No, he's on vacation at the moment, so he's not on this.
Okay, I think we had this discussion. I think while you were on vacation, back and forth.
Possible.
And I thought he added that in the call when you ask for the MP set, whether we do want to just add an info argument to that call, so we can later on add versioning and add stuff if we want to without having to change the API.
Okay, so I sort of remember being notified of that. It has not happened because there's no info.
Okay.
So yeah, that's not a bad thing, just for future expansibility of the API.
Right.
It's irrelevant. We can just say, yeah, I think that's a reasonable change. I can get.
I mean, this is not performance critical, so if you never use the info object, then who cares, right?
It can be info null forever. That's fine. But if we want to use it, we can. Yeah. Okay.
I can see the versioning being easily implemented through that without us having to think about it now.
I mean, that's certainly one possible way of doing it. I don't know if that's the right way of doing it, but it certainly would give us the possibility of doing that, and coming back later and thinking, oh, I wish we'd put an info object on here, is the wrong way of. Yeah, we should just put it on if we want to use it.
That's exactly my suggestion. Yeah. Okay, so if we could add that still thing, that would be great. Perfect. So anybody else, any comments? Anybody happy with this? Anybody have any concerns left? Anybody would have a problem, or would be have a problem voting for this if Dan would bring it up for vote in March, as is?
So I guess the procedure thing is, I'm going to do some sort of reading of something in December for the.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question, Martin.
The question is if Dan would bring this up for the reading as is in December now, and assuming yes, we could make some small, very minor changes still to the no vote rules, and then would bring this ticket up as is in March for voting. Would anybody have any objections against this ticket at this point? Because if yes, then now would be the time to bring it up.
So no.
Okay, very good. All right. Dan, you wanted to ask a different question still, or?
No, I think most people have indicated that they're in favour of this ticket, certainly generally, and more specifically, people have been saying yes, it addresses my concerns for some time now. So I think this is probably the last set of well, I've been saying that a number of times, but I hope that this is the last set of effectively normative changes, of conceptual changes like this. This isn't really a conceptual change. This is just refining the wording to make it clear what we always intended. But it's normative text changes. I'm hoping that this is the last of that sort of change, and that this is the version that will be presented in December, and it will be barring spelling mistakes and things like that. That's what we'll vote on in March, and again in June and whatever.
Yeah. So Dan, can I make a suggestion then? If we really think that's it, when adding the info argument and having another time proofreading, why don't you actually build the final pull request for the complete ticket, build a PDF, and send a reading announcement right away with the PDF on it?
So that's basically my intention. So
okay,
there was one set of comments outstanding. So it's Thomas on this call said he's got there's some spelling mistakes and things that he's noticed in a read through from the that I posted this morning.
okay.
So there's a few things like that will probably be done, today, tomorrow, maybe the end of the week. Certainly in the next few days anyway. My intention was to accept this pull request in, and then make sure that the pull request into the canonical MPI repository has everything that we've got. That's the absolute latest final version. Then build it and do the announcement. I will re-announce it at the deadline day, because that's people won't expect it to be that early, but get it out there as soon as possible.
As soon as you send out that version, we can also put it on the agenda. So when people start looking at the agenda, they see that it's going up for reading. So we probably should encourage people also to look over it again before the 2-week deadline, because if there's something, it's so much easier to fix before the 2-week deadline.
Yeah, I've got to have some time, to do that before the 2 weeks. Otherwise, it will be after the 2 weeks, and we'll have to do no votes.
Right, on the 2-week deadline is equally bad.
Yes, you might as well do it on the day. Yes.
Okay, good. Any other questions or comments on the ticket? If not, I think we're done for today, right? Anybody else, anything else you want to bring up?
Nope.
If not, we meet again next week on the 23rd, talk about hardware topologies, correct?
I think so.
Is Guillaume on it? Is Guillaume on the phone call? No, he's not. Okay. So Guillaume and Rolf will lead that part.
Martin, for the 30th, I think we could have the partition communication. Ryan should confirm that in a couple of days, but I think we're very, so I'll let Ryan make the final thing, but don't give it away to anyone else yet before we hear from Ryan. Maybe by Friday morning, we'll give you an indicator on that. We're having another meeting tomorrow to go through things again, and we should be very close. We should be probably ready then. Again, speaking for Ryan here, he's probably on the call, but don't give it away till at least we talk to you Friday morning.
Okay, that sounds good. And then we have 2 more meetings, November 6th and 13th, before the deadline. Well, before SC, to be more precise. So if that's for reserve for some of the other big things. So Tony, do you have any update on what's happening with big counts and when you guys will be ready?
It was a very good discussion this morning. It's mechanically going positively again. We lost a little momentum with Martin been off, moving back to Europe, and that's not a statement about where he went. It's a statement about he needed time off. The things seem to be going forward. Well, we certainly can. We should probably take the last slot that you have available. Computer, we can show you where we are. We can. The people are fully informed. We should probably just grab that and run with it. But again, we had a meeting this morning, and it's very mechanical. We're still working on the modifications of the chapter, and the people are lining up again, sort of rebuilding momentum. We lost a little bit of time with the shuffle and everyone being busy with other things. So I think in essentially
Sure.
3 more weeks, we'll be much further along and be able to show what's going to be ready for December. But we're not ready now. The
Okay. So we'll definitely
last
keep.
slot would be ours if possible.
That's the November 13th then. Sure. Okay.
One way or another,
Okay.
we'll support. We need to do it so that people understand where we are on the 13th of November, even if it's not complete, which is likely. Okay, great.
So I think there's a chance that we might want to ask a question or two about one or two of the design decisions before that, but we haven't yet decided whether that's a good idea or not.
So maybe there's a 15-minute slice out of someone else's virtual meeting for that, Dan, at the end, like there was 10 minutes today. Maybe that's what we should opt for, is to ask for a slice maybe 2 weeks earlier when we're ready, or we could ask the forum through an email.
Yeah, you can always do that. That's certainly fine. We can attach it if hyper topologies doesn't need the whole time, or you guys with the partition communication doesn't need the whole time. You can always attach it to that.
I partition could use the whole hour, but I'm hoping topologies is very non-controversial, so we could have 10 minutes.
Sure. Everything is uncontroversial until you read it.
Right. So I think we have our next, it's literally 9 a.m. Eastern next Wednesday. After that, we should have cemented, by then or after then, we'll have cemented any design questions, and I'll take that offline with you, Dan, too. So, but with the group. So we will either send an email out or ask for a small slice of virtual meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Then anybody, anything else? If not, I think we can close this meeting then and talk to you all next week again.
Yep. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
So thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Yeah,
everybody. And I think, Dan, you need to officially close the meeting and actually close out the session.
Oh yes, because I'm home. Right.
Oh, yeah.
I lost connection
Thank
in
you.
the middle, so you're the host.
Can do that. No problem.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.